The old adage that the value of the fur, beaver in this instance, is predetermined when the animal is in the trap, and nothing can change that, could never be more wrong. In fact, the value is determined long before the pelt is harvested. The traps you select, the way they are prepared and set, all have a very strong influence on the value of that pelt. To say nothing of the season you choose to harvest. When you think about it, the harvester has a tremendous amount of impact on the value of their beaver pelts, long before a trap is even set. Let's start with timing your harvest. As you can see by the patterns on the leather, primeness is a progression regulated by day length. Shortening day length primes the fur. The darker areas are coming on prime, while the lighter areas are fully prime. If primeness were the main harvesting and grading criteria, those harvested in late December through early March would be the best. As a rule, a harvester can expect beaver taken prior to November 1st will tend to grade silky. Those harvested later in mid-December will most likely grade semi-heavy, and after December 20th would probably receive the heavy grade. By mid-March, and as soon as the water reopens in the spring, the beaver starts to shed both underfur and guard hairs. Spring beaver also may have a problem with damage. Most spring beaver will not grade higher than slight, and the harvester should pull his traps as soon as he sees too much bite damage. Harvesters should know the market and trap accordingly. It makes no sense to harvest fall beaver when the market for silkies is limited, and waiting an additional 3 weeks will bring you a good marketable semi-heavy pelt. There are many factors that determine when the best time to harvest beaver are, and later we will explain how timing affects the grade of pelts. This one is easy. Use properly sized traps, keep them clean, and set them to minimize damage. Never use rusty traps, as even underwater, the rust will mark the fur. It's a simple job to keep your traps speed dip treated. Just dip them at the end of the season before you put them away. Body grippers are best used in 8 or 10-inch configurations, although 7-inch openings have their place. The newer series traps prevent the springs from sliding down the jaws and go a long way in preventing pelt damage. Strive for a quick kill across the neck just behind the head. This keeps the fur impact at a minimum. To facilitate this type of catch, trigger placement is critical. Ideally, the trigger should be on the bottom with the wires in the middle of the trap. If the trap can't be set with the trigger on the bottom, the dog can be offset on the jaws with the trigger bent across the opening of the trap.
And this is an improperly set conibear trap. The best way to set a conibear in this respect is you have the dog and everything on the bottom, so that when the trap fires, that's coming up to the belly.
With the triggers on top, both the dog and the trigger will skin off guard hairs and even underfur. And this is even more exaggerated in the springtime, skinning them in the worst possible place, behind the head, where the grader's hand goes when he weighs the pelt. If the trigger must be set on top, offset it to one side and bend the wires across the opening, sometimes extending the trigger wires. Foot restraining traps should always be set to drown the beaver as quickly as possible. Any other arrangement increases the possibility of damaging the pelt. Not only physically, but mud and debris can be very difficult to clean. All snaring should be done under the ice. This facilitates quick drowning and minimal damage to the pelt. Snares should be anchored on the bottom of the pole and tended regularly to prevent the beaver from rising to the top and freezing in the ice. The colder the weather, the more often you should tend. Snares for beaver should never be set in open water unless the beaver can be drowned quickly. The longer a beaver is in the snare, the more severe the pelt damage.
Once again, snare mark on a beaver. We see the blood hemorrhaging on the leather side, and we know right away that there's going to be damage to the underfur on the fur side.
Field cleaning your beaver is another very important step in maintaining high-quality pelts. Poorly cleaned pelts and trap damage are two top reasons trappers lose money. This is where the experienced trapper makes a difference.
The most common problem we see in beaver shipped to the auction are trappers not properly washing and cleaning their beaver before they put them up. This presentation is not only important to the graders, but particularly to the buyers.
If you capture the beaver in a body-gripping trap, be sure the trap is not frozen in the fur. If so, take it home, trap and all, and let it thaw. Remove the trap the same way as if there were ice on the fur from being frozen in. Don't try to pull the ice off. Take the beaver and the ice home and let it thaw in a warm, not hot location. Do not try to pull the ice off the fur. If the ice chunks are big, put the beaver back under water and leave him for a while. Much of the large chunks will slip off. Cut snares off quickly before they freeze in the fur. Always cut the snare on the belly side or under the chin. Slide the cutters in and up, then cut. This avoids cutting the guard hairs and down into the fur. If not possible, take the beaver back to the skinning shed, let it thaw, then cut. Never lay your wet beaver on the ice. It will freeze the guard hairs into the ice immediately. And when you pick it up, the fur stays frozen to the ice. In fall and spring, be sure to thoroughly clean the beaver in clean brook water, a stream, or a pond. Take them home and hose them off if the beaver is especially muddy. Another way is to find an open brook with some current and tie or stake the beaver in the current. You can even leave them there for several hours, letting the water thoroughly clean the pelt. In the winter, snow is a great fur cleaner. Just keep rolling and rubbing the beaver in the snow. It will dry and clean the pelt pretty well. Almost all drowned beaver bleed from the nose. A little bit on the nose is not a problem. If you have a good catch, don't stack the beaver up. Avoid getting blood on the fur of the other beaver. Either keep them one layer high and not touching, or wrap the nose with something to absorb the blood. Old socks work well for this. Just slip it over the beaver's head. A lot of trappers carry old fur bags with them when they are tending. Bagging the beaver keeps the fur clean and from freezing to the toboggan or truck bed. Back at the fur shed, if you get blood on the fur, wash it with warm water. Some trappers use a little Dawn dish detergent. Baking soda also works. The next important step is drying the beaver. This can be done on racks or by hanging them in a cool area with a good fan on them. They should be hung head down so blood doesn't drain to the base of the tail and get on the pelt. Dry them thoroughly. This is important because wet spots on the fur can cause snags when the pelt is fleshed, especially if you're using a beam. It is best to put your beaver up as soon as possible. If you need to keep your beaver unskun, they will keep for a couple of days in a cool location and should be left laying on their back. This prevents any taint that might occur from coming in contact with the thin stomach muscle through the belly fur. Once the pelt is dried, brush out the fur. Be very thorough. Carefully remove any large pills in the fur that can cause snagging of the fleshing knife.
You can feel them for any burrs or pills or anything that would catch when you were fleshing that would cause a tear in the pelt from the knife.
Any good dog brush works well, along with a finer currying brush or a heavy comb. Pitch is another matter.
It's better if the pitch can be removed by the trappers as much as possible, because if the pelts lay around for an extended length of time, what happens is it solidifies and becomes even more difficult for us to remove it. And the best way I could think of would probably be to use paint thinner or something like that, a solvent, to be able to dissolve the resin of the pitch.
Here is a list of key points. Know your markets. Harvest beaver when they are at their optimum value. Keep your traps clean and in good working order. Set them for quick, humane kills. Field clean your beaver fur and protect it in transport. Clean your beaver, clean your beaver, clean your beaver. Never pull ice out of the fur. Dry the fur before skinning your beaver.